Hey everyone, Liam from Solitude here, and in this video I'm going to take you through what I think are the 30 best Australian bands of all time. Now, I know this is going to be a list with a lot of different opinions out there, so feel free to share them in the comments, and if you disagree with me, that's okay. It's just about having a chat about Australian music. In number 30, I've gone with a band who were big in the late 90s and the mid 2000s, but still put out new music to this day and have been very prolific in the punk rock genre. But the thing that set them apart was their rockabilly heritage. In number 29 is a group who really tapped into that Australiana vibe that was big in the 90s, and it got them a huge amount of attention on platforms like Triple J, and subsequently won them ARIA Awards. In number 28 is one of the most successful pop outfits that came out of Australia in the 90s. They were a duo and they had great success overseas, getting many of their songs played in movies. And of course, their music is recognizable to this day. For number 27, I've gone with a band who were big in the 80s mostly, and a couple of their hits still get a lot of attention on classic Australian rock radio, especially one that is iconic in the way it describes Australia. For number 26 is a band from a similar era to the one that I previously mentioned. And once again, they tap into Australian culture very well. I guess you could also say this band was kind of like the Australian version of The Police. For number 25 is a group that were also pretty big in the 80s and had a lot of popular songs, not just here in Australia, but overseas. They've probably seemed to be a little bit corny nowadays, but hey, they were great at writing pop hits. For number 24, this group were massive in the pub rock scene of the late 70s and all throughout the 80s, and to this day, a couple of their tracks live on classic Australian rock radio. She keeps no secrets from you. She keeps no. For number 23, I've gone with a band who were one of the very first successful punk rock outfits that came out of Australia, and they were super influential for their time in the 70s, and they've gone on to become one of the more iconic bands from that punk rock scene. It's gotta be a new race. Kids are gonna start it over. Now gonna be a day. Number 22, I've put in a group who are arguably Western Australia's most well known because of the way they described the culture in Perth, and they've gone on to become a classic in that sort of emo post-punk wave that got really big in the late 70s and early 80s.
Oh, but that's not her. That's not her. That's just the lie. Just the lie.
With number 21, I've gone with what I believe is Australia's most successful yacht rock band. Now, I know that genre doesn't really get a lot of accolades nowadays, but it was extremely popular back in the 70s mostly, and this band was Australia's masters of it. Hang on, help is on its way. I'll be there as fast as I can. For number 20, it's an Indigenous group who put out music that was iconic for its time and still lives on to this day for being very poignant with the messaging, and it was able to mesh both Indigenous culture and music together with a contemporary sound. Number 18, I've gone with a rock group who were really big in the 80s and early 90s. especially in the indie rock scene overseas. They got a lot of attention on college rock radio, and they were super big here in the local pub rock scene as well. And many of their songs still get played on classic Oz rock radio. For number 18, I've put in the biggest rap group that has ever come out of Australia. They were the ones who broke through and created the slipstream for all Aussie hip-hop acts to follow, and they're the only rap group that I've got in this list. Whether or not you want to call them a band, I know that's disputable, but hey, it's a group of musicians who are all together making sound, so I call it a band. I feel like Bobby Fischer, always forms ahead. My competition is a name, gonna stop me. In number 17, I've put in a rock band from the 80s mostly, and a little bit of the 90s too, who were very good at making that sort of underground pub rock music that was super popular for the time, but with a little bit more sophistication, a lighter edge, and they made it so that you could kind of sit around a campfire and sing along. When the river runs dry, you will return to the scene of the crime. For number 16, I have put in a band that you could arguably say are the most successful folk rock outfit to ever come out of Australia, or maybe not even folk rock, but just folk generally. They've written some amazing hits that live on to this day, and some of the most iconic Australian pieces of work. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows. For number 15, I have put in what I pretty much would call a ska rock band from the 80s, who had a huge hit when Australia won the America's Cup, because their song was able to speak about Australia and its culture here, and it just took off because Australia was in the news. Who can it be now? Who can it be now? For number 14, I've gone with this band from mostly the 80s and a little bit of the 90s, who are probably most recognizable for being one of the most popular rock bands with a female doing the singing. And you know, female singer aside, they have written some amazing songs that still get a lot of attention to this day. Number 13, I've gone with one of the more modern bands in this list, and once again, it's a disputable band, I guess you could say. I know some people are going to get angry about me putting this band in, but hey, they've won awards at the ARIAs for best group before, so I'm going to include them as a band. I think you probably know who I'm talking about. They're one of the most successful psychedelic rock outfits in the world, and in my opinion, probably the most successful band to come out of Australia in the past 15 years. For number 12, I've gone with this group who were big in the 80s mostly, especially when they started writing music that was more about Australian life commentary, and they just took off nationally because of that. I guess they had a little bit of an overseas following as well. It was mostly here in Australia that they got big. I don't mind. For number 11, I've put in this punk rock group who were arguably the first from Australia to do it, and they were super influential all over the world as well. I think they've even popped up as being a favourite of Kurt Cobain's. With number 11, it's another disputable band, I guess you would say, but if it's a singer who announces his band in the title, I kind of count it as a band in my mind. I think that this group are one of the most well-known Australian acts in this country and overseas who do that sort of title thing. And, I mean, you can't deny it's because they write great music. The passion, it dies in the light. For number 9, I've decided to put in a group who was super influential in the 70s because they were able to team up with a label called Mushroom and really launch that sort of platform, which went on to sign so many other successful Australian bands and artists. This group were the ones who pioneered that.
You watch a horror movie, they're on my TV. Horror movie, they're on my TV. Horror movie.
In the number 8 position, I've gone with a slightly more modern alternative rock group who started out as kind of like this metal thing, but evolved their sound to tone it down a bit and make lighter, more heartfelt music that was able to comment on Australian culture and things that connected better with a wider audience.
I'll be the one to pick you up again when you decide you've had enough of it.
In number 7, I've put in a group who were famous for being teenagers when they became famous, but as they grew older and became more mature musicians, they put out better and better music to make themselves one of the most iconic Australian bands of all time, in my opinion. In number 6, I've put in a band that you might not know the names of their songs all the time, but they're the sort of band whose songs just get played when you walk in the shops or when you turn the radio on and you instantly recognize them. And one other thing, they are Australian, not Kiwis, okay?
And whenever I fall at your feet.
For the number 5 spot, I've put in arguably the most popular pub rock band who really kind of stayed in that pub rock scene and genre the most of all the pub rock bands in Australia in the 80s. And they've put out some iconic songs that were able to comment on Australian culture, as well as connect with that harder edge Aussie bloke. For number 4, I've gone with a band who I believe are arguably the first Australian export to be really famous and influence so many other Australian musicians to want to get in a band and try and be famous. And for that reason, I think you've just got to put them so high up the list because they were the first ones to do it here. In number 3, I've gone with arguably the most successful Australian band at Social Commentary, and they came from the pub rock scene as well, but really kind of found slightly deeper niches to go towards. They were also able to comment on Indigenous culture very successfully as well, and I just think they deserve a lot of credit.
Read about it, read about it. One unjust ridiculous scene, ain't no doubt about it.
Now, in number 2, I think it's quite easy to nail down the last 2 spots, and the second best Australian band of all time, in my opinion, is one that was super big in the 80s and had a little bit of success in the 90s too. They were iconic for putting out party rock anthems.
Don't change the era, don't change a thing for me.
And in the number 1 spot, I've put the most obvious choice ever. They're clearly the most successful band to ever come out of Australia, selling the most records, being the most recognizable. As soon as you hear a note of their music playing, you can essentially recognize the band. There is no doubt that this is the best and biggest band to ever come out of Australia.
'Cause I'm